Hey, and welcome to the Black Unconscious. We are your hosts. I am Dr. Justin Hopkins.
And I am Raquel Martin.
And today we are recording Season 2, Episode 25, R. Kelly, Sexual Assault and Sociopathy, Part 2. And this is a special episode because we are recording live at Mindspace with Heartcast Media.
Yeah, so this is the best you'll ever hear us until we come back.
We're in a professional studio right now. This is nice.
It's pretty nice. We just got to come in and do stuff without having to figure out why something isn't working.
Right. And so we'll also have a video for you guys. We're really excited about it.
It's a pretty luxurious episode.
It really is.
I'm sorry it's such a shitty topic.
I don't know how we're going to go back to our old low budget ways.
Yeah, I think we're fucked.
Yeah. You get used to luxuries. It's just I know.
Just
not the same.
Thanks, Molly.
Shout out to Molly from Heartcast Media
you
for hooking
screwed us.
up.
I'll never be able to edit shit again.
We're so excited about this. But shout out to Molly. For better or for worse.
Yeah.
So we wanted to jump right back into our topic, continue from our part one. We got some places with it, but we want to take it a little bit further. And before we do so, Raquel, you want to share some resources again for the folks who this subject touches home for?
Yeah, and this is also on the Instagram page and also on the Facebook and stuff like that if you want to look up resources. But the National Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-4-A-CHILD. It's the number 4. So 1-800-422-4453. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. And the National Sexual Assault Hotline is 1-800-656-HOPE.
Yep. And all of those, all of the resources you just provided, I mean, if you look those things up, they have websites, they have tons of resources there. So if you or someone you know or a loved one is struggling with the kind of issues that we just mentioned, those are some really, really good resources.
Yeah, you can call the numbers, or if you just want to educate yourself on warning signs or things you should be looking out for, or resource centers and stuff like that, places you can go on that too.
Absolutely.
So you can call there, or you can just go on the website and learn.
You got it. So part one, right? We talked about a lot of different things. Real quickly, I think one of the things that I kind of honed in on were just kind of contextualizing some of the behaviors from predators, and then specifically R. Kelly. I talked about sociopathy broadly and how those personality traits or those personality structures are organized by power and privilege. And the one dot I wanted to connect is that when you have someone who is organized in that way, they fail to see humans as people. They see them as objects. And that's what makes that kind of personality so scary, because people just become a means to an end. There's a defect in humanity that makes it hard for them to empathize much at all. And so that's what becomes so scary about that kind of personality. And I did make that analogy to a serial killer because it's some of the same psychological tendencies that are there for people, again, who are organized that way.
Yeah, and any kind of criminal. I mean, it's just criminal behavior and repetitive criminal behavior, and the whole thing with serial killers is the fact that it happens multiple times. So it's just it's. I think it's always seen as it's one thing when crime happens once. If it's a crime of passion or something like that. But when it's something that's meditated, premeditated, and it's happening multiple times, there's a different trajectory when it comes to your thoughts in that aspect.
Yep.
And this isn't something that was an isolated incident. This is happening for multiple years. So there's a different thought process in that versus just having a person who committed a crime of passion. Now, it's still a crime. I mean, he's still a terrible human being, but it's just that it's a difference between them. The same way there's a difference between an acute and chronic stressor. There's different effects on the body. So there's a different mindset for someone who will repeatedly commit a crime over and over again and then improve the way that he commits the crime, right? Has more resources, has better ways to approach people, knows how to kind of keep himself out of the situation, still putting out music and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's levels to that shit.
Yeah,
I mean, because we all want to have some sense of power and autonomy in our lives, but for someone who's a repeat offender and a predator, there's a different level of focus and compulsion to use people in a particular way.
Yeah.
So today we want to get into a number of other things. We'll see how far we get. We want to talk about sexual assault and how it impacts the mind. We want to talk about why people end up staying in relationships where they're being abused. That's a very, very important topic. And then hopefully a little bit more, getting into some of the stats about abuse reporting and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we're going to get through everything because I can't do this stuff for my soul for another episode.
Yeah.
It's just too draining.
It is.
Me.
No,
we need a lighter topic. Feel free to send us some suggestions too, but Yeah, I can't. It's just
Yeah.
too much. I don't even want to watch the film because it's just
know.
too intense. I can't. No, we're not doing a part 3.
I know.
If we don't get to something, it's not happening. And just educate yourselves. But I can't do 3 parts of this.
No, that's
It's
real.
too much.
That's real. And,
for my soul.
We have to have our own personal boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And we'd be hypocrites if we didn't take that into consideration. So the point about like sexual assault and how it impacts the psyche, right? So
Yeah.
we're going to try to stay on task and really get through it for the sake of our own self-care. Right?
I am fabulous at staying on task.
I am not.
I'm gonna blame it all on you as I divert
And
us
you know
off
you
task.
ain't either. I just want to say that.
When there are fun topics, this is not fun.
Yeah.
But it is important because I think there's a lot of stuff that people don't understand about like the effects and the stuff that happens afterwards and even like where to go if this happens to you or a friend or something like that. So I do
Yeah.
understand it's necessary, but
It's
ugh.
hard. It is.
Like, oh,
You ain't lying.
geez.
You ain't
It's just
lying.
very draining.
Well, in terms of like how it impacts us, right? Like, I think we all know, right, that our brain impacts who we are and our like behavior, the things that we think and how we feel. But experience also impacts the brain.
Yeah, and the way it develops and or lack thereof, or the way it like what's that thing? It was a word. I don't remember it.
Plasticity.
No. The way it develops and the way it can I'm thinking of money. I'm saying depreciate, but decompensate. Yes,
Decompensate,
because it can
okay.
like affect. It also will affect the way your brain can.
Parts
certain
of
parts
it
can decompensate. Yeah,
absolutely.
Words are
Right?
hard.
There's actually a couple of decades of literature that shows that therapy, in particular, can like change like neuronal connections in the brain, and the same happens for other experiences as well. At
Yeah.
any point in life, experience can impact the brain, but at no point is it more malleable. And the word is used as like plasticity. Like the brain has a certain level of plasticity, and it's like it's moldable to a certain
yeah. It's like
throughout
malleable
life.
to a certain aspect.
Right, but it's most malleable during childhood and adolescence. So that old adage, like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. There's a little bit of validity to it. Like
I hate that saying,
I do too, because I think it's a little bit too like absolute.
and it's kind of against the thing we dedicated our whole life to.
Absolutely.
Like if you can't keep teach your old dog new tricks, why
That's
why
true.
am I going to therapy then? I'm gonna save this copay and I'm just gonna kick it, and so no, we are not as a podcast, as a brand, we are not for that saying.
But what it does mean is that you're gonna have to work harder the older you get to like make certain changes actually stick and develop certain habits.
Yeah,
but
I get that.
But it's definitely like change is possible. But obviously,
change is
like,
always possible when you put forth the effort.
When
Some
you put
people are
forth the
just mad
effort.
lazy. I think that's what that goes to. Like, you can't teach your old dog new tricks because like he ain't coming out, he ain't going to practice, he's just staying in a crib watching the news. That dog sucks. That's the problem.
But
He
an
ain't
old
going
dog who wants to learn
therapy.
new tricks.
Yes, an old dog who
Over
wants to
time,
learn. Yeah,
good.
your age, you can learn stuff from now to 70. You got like 90-year-olds running marathons and
Yeah.
stuff, looking more fit than me.
All right, Raquel, but you get the point. What I'm making,
I just say
right?
I don't like that saying.
Okay,
and I just
fine.
need to make it known what I do not agree with.
So, I do agree with you. I do
Okay.
agree with you there.
That's
Yes.
all that matters.
Old
That's
dogs
the
can
only
learn new
statement
tricks.
that matters.
Oh,
that you
gosh.
agree with me.
Yes. I'm also wrong. Does that
Yeah,
do
oh my
something for you?
God. Man,
But I'm not
we gotta
really wrong.
record here more often. That's the quickest you've admitted to being wrong in your life.
Anyway, like the brain is more malleable when you're young, but obviously you can mold it when you're older as well.
Yes.
So when it comes to assault, right, and assault and trauma, your humanity is essentially completely eviscerated, right? Like you're literally objectified, and you're turned into an object, and of course you can internalize that because the experience is so powerful, and objects have no rights. So therefore, it's not uncommon for people who have endured trauma to have difficulty asserting themselves because they feel so unimportant, or like they're entitled to nothing. It's not uncommon for them to feel worthless or incompetent or incapable. And in fact, Dr. Narcott in the documentary said
Was Dr. Narcott the male or the female?
she was the woman.
Okay.
Yeah, I think her first name is Candace
Okay.
Narcott. She said women who have histories of child sexual abuse are more likely to be abused as an adult because they have trouble advocating for themselves and asserting themselves. So,
Yeah, that's such an oversimplification of the reasoning behind that, though, right? Like,
go ahead.
okay. So that's the one problem. That's another problem I always have with like the documentaries. Like, you only have a certain amount of time, right? Not like all documentaries, right? So
Yeah.
it's not like we could just do this every single week. So we can't cover everything, and you also have to appeal to a certain audience. So like, there's such an oversimplification. But then you also have to consider who's watching it, who's just going to take it in that sense. You know, like how I said last episode, how you can't just state, you know, oh, he has to have protective factors, and because he also went through trauma, and that's like a huge disservice to everyone who's going through trauma to say that like this is the reason why he was assaulting people because he was assaulted. Like that's bullshit, right? So like that's such an oversimplification of like the you know, so many factors that contribute to them being victims. Like there's so many other protective and risk factors to being a victim again, right? Not just being assaulted before.
Yeah, I would say so. Well, again, right? Like so someone who's assaulted a second time, right?
Yeah.
They're more like, once you have been assaulted, it's the research says, right? Obviously, this doesn't cover everybody, but there's a higher chance that you could be assaulted again because of the way that the original insult impacts you. But I guess what you're saying is that you don't necessarily see like direct correlations between like how people are impacted by.
Well, no, I'm saying like there's also other things that people should like consider. So like if say, because I'm always thinking of like
for why that someone might be abused a second time.
Yeah, like so I'm always thinking about the fact of like, so I just come from the aspect of like when I worked with my patients, right? And how they would respond to hearing stats like that. Yeah. So it's just like, well, it's going to happen to me again because it's happening. You know, like that's not, there's so many other things that contribute to that.
So in I guess to argue against Dr. Narcott's comment, right? It's not just because they have trouble advocating for themselves.
Yeah.
Right. It's also, I see what you're saying.
We're also in a society that tries to teach people to stop being raped instead of stopping the rapists.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's a problem.
Right.
You know, just talking about our skirts when you got people like forcing themselves on people.
Right.
Skirt doesn't matter. Like it doesn't. You can be naked. It doesn't matter. Like you're never asking to be assaulted.
Well, one of the other factors is that there are people who assault.
Right? Exactly. There's no other risk factor than rapists. Like I don't. Just always like, what the fuck? What are you talking about? Like, oh, what was she? Shut up! I should be able to walk at home late at night. I should be able to not have to like be like, oh, dog, it's getting dark, so I ain't leaving the house because somebody can assault me.
No,
I should be able to say no to someone and not be afraid I'm gonna get punched in the face. As like a married one, like that should be the thing. Right. So just like you said, it's the biggest risk factor. Or the fact that there are rapists and the fact that rapists aren't being punished adequately or being caught and they're already questioning the victims. That's the biggest risk factor.
Right.
These
Period.
Flippers.
Like whether it's like the second assault or the first assault.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can be you can be the most assertive person in life, walk with authority, all that, stay up all day, wear pantsuits, be like a professional, and you could still get assaulted when you're walking into your like, I don't know, 50-story walk up in Manhattan. Like it doesn't matter.
Of course.
Because it's just people out there.
Right. No, and I
she did make a good point, but I just always like, but
I hope it didn't communicate like these are the only reasons why people who were assaulted initially may end up being assaulted again. But I wanted to highlight that just to kind of communicate like this is how, because there's so many questions that people ask about like, well, like. Blaming the victim, saying that, a lot of the like stupid, ignorant, like highly offensive things that you said about watching for their clothes or watching out for like the clothes they wear or whatever the case may be. But I think it's also important for people to kind of get like just how painful, just how powerful the impact of experiencing a trauma can be for a lot of folks. And so much so, like, when those things happen, again, you are objectified to such a degree that it's hard to make sense of yourself, other people, in the world after that. Like, those are like kind of like the three areas of thinking and being that change. Like, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about others, how you feel about the world. Like, all of that is very, I think... My hope was like for people to just kind of understand like that's a really big deal.
It's a really hard thing to remedy. Like, how do you trust the world? How do you trust, like, if it's a man, how do you trust men? If it was a woman, how do you trust women? If you don't feel like you were fully supported by the justice system, how do you feel like you're protected by the justice system now? If you ever felt that way,
right?
How do you trust yourself? Right? Like if you feel like you're having anxiety, depression, you feel like you're having trauma symptoms, you feel like you're having flashbacks, like how do you trust yourself to be able to function in society if you feel like your body is against you? Like how do you trust anything? And I think that's the biggest thing to remedy after an assault, like the fear and the just, you're not the same person.
Yeah.
And like you may want to get back to that person. You may feel like you can never get to that person, but how do you remedy that? Because it was severed.
I think one of the things, like you brought up trust, and I think that's a really, really good point, right? How do you trust yourself? How do you trust other people? How do you trust the world around you?
Yeah.
Right? Like humans, like we naturally have the desire to avoid pain, right?
Yeah.
And so
I'm not a
our
fan.
brains are literally wired. We talk about fight and flight, right? Like we've talked about that on the show before. Like our brains are literally wired with biological structures to help us pick up on signs that fear or that something painful might be impending. That's why like most people like are born with a fear of spiders, right? You see that little red mark on a black widow, you automatically have a fear response without you having to think about anything. It's because something within us is hardwired to see that and think that's pain, that's poison, I got to get away.
See, I kind of think it's always an experience thing. I think people are afraid of spiders.
No, it's both.
I think,
but
yeah,
it's both.
Yeah.
But it's nature and nurture.
Yeah.
Right? Like the nature is passed down generationally,
Yeah.
right? That's evolution. But the nurture, of course, right? There's
Like if you've never
too.
had a bad experience with spiders, you're just like, I mean, kill it and move or leave it alone.
Yeah, maybe
right?
you won't be terrified.
Maybe you won't be terrified.
But you don't want to give it a hug.
Yeah,
you know?
like, you know what? Like even a baby's like, that's not for me.
Right.
I think I'm gonna crawl my behind somewhere else.
When you experience trauma, like one of the things, like some of the like leading writers on complex trauma, which is like repeat trauma instead of like traditional PTSD, which is just like a single episode trauma. And I forget their names. Hopefully they forget.
Chronic and acute.
Chronic versus acute trauma, right? But I forget the name of the like researchers or whoever they are. But anyway, like one of the things that they talk about is how like trauma, what happens is your brain kind of changes focus. Like prior to trauma, you have what's called a more learning, developing, or exploring type of brain.
Okay.
Where you might feel like there's a freedom to learn, there's a willingness to explore, to kind of tolerate the unknown, to try new things, to evolve, right? Like all humans do. We have that capacity. After trauma, it can rob you of that, and your brain is focused more so on survival, right? It's about anticipating. Your thoughts are dominated by trying to anticipate and prevent danger because it was so painful, right? And because we naturally want to avoid painful situations, we have this sense. After you've experienced a trauma, you're like, how could this have possibly happened? And you constantly start like scanning your environment for signs. It's hard to trust. It's hard to tolerate things that are unknown. And because of that, it's also hard to learn. It's hard to develop new skills. It's hard to...
because you're focusing your energy on everything else.
It's just on survival, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways that I think that trauma really can impact people and rob them of a sense of joy, because then there's that focus on, I need to try to keep myself safe. I need to try to survive.
And a sense of develop, like an ability to progress and develop. And plus, everything you're naming,
sure.
We're all symptoms of PTSD,
Yes,
right?
they
Like, because
are.
all those
Yep.
aspects are aspects of
That's
PTSD.
hypervigilance.
The hypervigilance,
Right.
which, like, if you don't know what that is, that's just like before you could like walk down the street, you hear honking and sneezing, and you know it's not an issue. Now you walk down the street, you hear a noise, you're just on 10,
Right?
Like you're I don't know, you're ready to pounce. You don't know what's gonna happen.
Right. Similarly, like right on like on the 4th of July, like there's been growing awareness that fireworks actually really startle and trigger veterans. Right?
Yes,
especially combat veterans.
You know what else is really bad for veterans? Because I go to a military school. One of the worst places that veterans always stay, one is driving. That's why when it's really difficult, one of the biggest things that they try to help them reacclimate to is driving. Another thing is Walmart is really bad for them.
Yeah.
Why would you think Walmart is bad
Crowded.
for them? It's crowded.
Loud
They got like
noises.
stuff on.
The aisles
The
kind of
aisles
like...
are tall.
Yeah.
You can't really look around them. You don't know who's on the other aisle.
They kind of
Like,
mimic
there's-
those small street corridors in the Middle East.
And if you're used to being very hypervigilant, used to having, like what's on the corner, what's around the corner, who's coming from you, Walmart is not the place to be.
No, it's
like,
not.
They
It's the
don't-
worst place. It's the worst
It's
place
the worst
for a
place.
lot of
That
combat
and driving's
veterans.
like very difficult.
Yeah, because of the IEDs.
Yep.
And
driving around here sucks anyway. I don't have any kind of trauma, and I hate it.
yeah.
Like,
well, you also, I mean, you grew up in Philly, and like potholes are like really like the size of a street.
yeah. Oh my God. I
You know,
feel
I
like
really-
the city should legit have to pay for my car at times.
I thought New
Baltimore
York
is
was
just as bad though. Baltimore is bad. Like when I'm going to work, I'm like, oh my God. Like, I think I hit a pothole one time and legit my stuff came out my cup holder.
That is not okay.
This is life.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to starve today.
Oh my gosh. But like to your point, right? Like when you've experienced a trauma, you start to constantly scan for signs. And if it's hard to like pick out a sign, you start to find I mean, you search for answers. It's hard to make meaning of it. So you search for answers. So some people might be inclined to say like, well, what if I could have done this? Maybe that wouldn't have happened. What if I could have done that? And maybe it wouldn't have happened. Or maybe like you just start to try to like look for any possible thing that could suggest that it could happen again because it's so painful. And it really can, to our point, right? It could really can like make it hard to like learn and have fun and just explore.
Yeah, and some of the hardest part in therapy and working with my patients is the fact that there is no reason. Like, okay, we don't know if like anything would have changed. Like the what ifs don't help. If we'd all be drunk, like that'd be amazing. But like there's no way to know if anything you did would have been different. And you could have changed everything in the world. This isn't your fault. Like it's not even like thinking of like if I had walked down the street, would they have not come for me? This is their fault. Like one of the most difficult things is acknowledging the fact that like, I mean, we will never know if something would have changed what happened, but it did happen. And there's no reasoning behind it. Some people suck. You know, having to work with people going through the most difficult experiences they will ever have to go through in their life as children. Like I've had patients as young as 8. Like that's hard to explain to a child that like their children, the best thing about them is their innocence, right? Like the world is good. And then that gets severed for them at like 8 or younger. Because people have way younger patients. Like some of the hardest part is just being like, I can't, like, honey, I can't tell you why that happened to you. The only thing I can tell you, some people are mean, some people are evil. I'm trying to work through this for you so you're not triggered through this for your entire life. But there's nothing that you did. Right. And which is hard because children are more concrete. It's like actions, consequences. Yes, right. I do this, I do this. So clearly that means if I had done something different, this wouldn't have happened. No, that's not what that means. Yeah. That just means that like life is not fair for everyone. Well, life isn't fair anyway. But it's just, that's the hardest part to remedy. That like, what did I do? Nothing. You did nothing wrong.
Right, it's so easy, right, when someone experiences something so devastating to try to take control of the situation because it was like something that like realistically it was something that was out of your control.
Their control was taken away from them and you want that back.
But like you want to somehow protect yourself.
So it can't happen again.
Right. And
so it's like if I don't go out the house, this will never happen again.
There's ownership there. Yeah. And to your point about like life not being fair, like that's one of the like main things that gets like shattered for a lot of people. We all have like a healthy this is about to get real cynical.
I would say minorities not so much. I feel like we learned that, know, and that's like one of the issues, right? That children don't get to stay children if they're minorities for long.
Well, let me say my thought because I think you're right. Like I think just about everyone has like a healthy denial about being in control of their life and being safe at all times, right? We like most times, right? We all have like a healthy denial about that. But you're right. I think people of color, not so much, right?
Yeah.
Like women, not so much, right? Like the more like oppressed you are, the more like marginalized your identity.
Underserved, underrepresented populations, not so much. Immigrants, not so much. They're constantly under attack. Like that's the issue with most people, and that's the issue where it makes it so hard. And one of the reasons why I like working with children so much is because I work in community mental health, so they're more underserved, underrepresented populations, and they're the ones who basically know from the start or know from a very early age that like, no, there are people here who are not here to protect you. These are people who weren't told since birth that like the world is your oyster. Right. Like these are the people who need the help the most. Right. And that's the problem with a lot of like little black boys and black girls is that they're not told from the beginning that their life matters. They're not told from the beginning that the police are meant to protect you. They're told from the beginning, like, mind your business, put your hands up. Here's what you have to say. Like, because these people are not here to protect you. And there's a fear because it's not like a whole drop your weapon thing. Your weapon is your skin. So that's a bigger issue, and that kind of like it can make it harder for some people in a healing process who have never had to experience anything like that. Yeah, who thought like I thought the justice system was here to protect me. Why did he get off on like a technicality?
Yeah, I think like I also think. Right, for a lot of folks, we live with what's called like a just world belief, right? Like good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Yeah. And like when we're young, it starts when we're very little, right? Be a good boy, be a good girl, and good things will happen.
You get rewarded.
Get good grades, you get rewarded, right? Do bad things, you have to go on timeout. We have to take this away from you, like you get punished. So that gets shattered, right? That very fundamental belief, that core idea about like how the world works gets shattered when you experience a trauma, and I think that makes it really hard.
Because it's something unnatural.
Right. So we wanted to go into like why do people end up staying in relationships that are abusive, right? Like why does domestic violence not occur just once but chronically over the course of a relationship, and how people end up staying, right? And let's be clear about this because Raquel, you again like brought up a really good point, right? the person doing the abuse is the one who is responsible for the abuse.
Yep. So don't ask someone why they didn't leave. They didn't. Get over it.
Yeah.
Like,
but to kind of understand that, so like Leslie Morgan Steiner, right? She does this TED Talk and she talks about like the cycles of abuse and the stages. And I feel like we alluded to some of this like last time we met. And so there are like 4 different stages that I think like powerfully convey like just how effed up like abusers are and how much they create this environment for their victim. So stage 1 is seduce and charm the victim by meeting an unmet psychological need, right?
Which is kind of akin to grooming with children.
Yeah, right. That's
not
exactly
kind of akin. You're right. It's exactly what it is. Yeah.
And that's what R. Kelly did, right? Like he used his vulnerability, right, to kind of like lure them into be vulnerable. And
that's right, because they get to see a side of him that people don't see, right?
Sure.
They were always like, oh, he was just so nice, so different. He wasn't a celebrity all the time.
And what did Andrea Kelly said? She said, this is a quote from the documentary. She said, you fall in love with the charmer. You fall in love with his brokenness. And then slowly he lets the other one creep in. He shows you his brokenness. He welcomes you in.
He'll heal me. Yeah.
It's this honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
And then like stage 2 is like you isolate the victim from others over time, leaving them more and more psychologically and physically dependent.
So they have no other resources. So it's like, where are you going to go? Who's going to believe you? You haven't talked to your friends in months. You think they're going to believe you? Are you serious?
You think they care about you?
Yeah. Right? You know, where are you going to go? You have no money. I have access to all of the accounts. I will know every single place you go. Where are you going to go?
So he isolates you, and then the abuser like uses him isolating you to make you dependent on him, and then uses that to suggest that no one else cares about you.
Yeah.
There's the like emotional manipulation there, right?
Yeah.
So then stage 3 is introduce the threat of violence with a loose rationale that it's your fault, or a direct rationale really that it's your fault and the threat was deserving. Yeah,
this is kind of gets to the point in the film where they were saying all this stuff about like you just didn't want to set them off. Right? Like there were rules that you had to follow, and you only got punished when you broke a rule. But rules were like making eye contact with other men and using your phone when you weren't supposed to. Like these are just things you should be able to do anyway. So you're just like, well, if I just follow the rules shouldn't even be here. Like that doesn't even make any sense. And then it starts happening that like, oh, new rules started. You didn't follow the rule fully, or you knew what I meant and you should have known not to do this. Like it's just it's like, oh, I just need to stay here and I'll get to the finish line, and then the finish line moves.
Yes, right.
And then like there are traps.
Right.
So it's not a real thing.
Right. Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, she was on the film, and she said, this is a quote from her: "People are brainwashed into thinking they have some complicity in their own abuse. They then feel a great sense of shame."
Because you always want some type of autonomy. You never want that power taken away from you.
Right.
And if you can control the aspect, if you can think like, if I hadn't done this, then he wouldn't have done that. That's still you trying to take control over your own, like what's happening to you.
Or even like someone might say like, he hit me and that is wrong, but he wouldn't have hit me if I didn't make him upset.
And it's like the sun and the moon and the stars make him upset.
Right.
It's like, well, what?
Right. He's not a good person.
He's not a good person. And it's not even like we're talking about R. Kelly in this sense, but like it's not just. We are both very fully aware that it is not just men that abuse people.
Yes,
there are women that abuse people too. Sure. Like there is a stark contrast in the percentages. Like so, I'm always going to be inclusive because I'm not an idiot, but it's not even.
It's not
by any way, shape, or form.
No, it's not close.
More victims are more likely to be female, and abusers are more likely to be male.
And that we
period.
Know. Right. I think the other thing that can happen is like this. That's the cycle of shame, right? Like so, you might like a victim might say, or a survivor might say, like, I should have left so long ago. How can I admit to myself to other people that I endured this for so long? What is wrong with me that I stayed? Maybe I should just try to fix it. Because maybe people won't believe me, or like maybe they'll just feel like it's my fault, and I already feel like it's partially my fault. I mean, there's so many like trap doors in there to kind of reason your way out of not leaving.
And the investment of time. Like you know how we talk about like don't hold on to a mistake just because you spent so much time making it. There's so much investment of time. Like what am I gonna do? When I met him, I was 20. Now I'm 30. Like no, like or 30 and I'm leaving at 40. Like there's so much of an investment in time, and time is such a precious thing because you could never get it back. But people do take that into account too. How long was I with this person? I have children with this person. No matter what, I'm still gonna have to see this person, so I might as well try to make it work. I've been with this person for years. I don't even know what it's like to be on my own. I don't even think I can be on my own. Like it's just. I always think whenever people are making big decisions, the amount of time they put into that one decision or changing is such a big thing. Because you're like, I'm never going to get that time back.
Right.
I just wasted time. And it's like, okay, well, you got more time to go.
Yeah.
I mean, take into account, don't be stupid, right? I'm not talking about just with abuse, but don't be looking like a fool out here and just be like, oh, I just decided one day to just walk away. I didn't, but just take the time to think about it. And if your life continues this way for the rest of your life, is that okay for you? No, walk away.
Right.
Just leave. And this comes for all decisions. It doesn't just have to be abusive relationships either. A lot of y'all are in dumb relationships that y'all need to leave. I'm sorry.
You always get off on this point. It's just like,
so many
if it's
people,
not working,
so many people
don't stay
in such sucky relationships.
Right.
Okay, just leave, or try to go. No one is worth.
But Raquel, you also
energy.
know, right? You also know, right? Like this is like kind of why we're talking about it. It's like it's really hard.
I know it's hard, but I just want people to have more voices telling them to go.
Yeah.
And whenever we get on relationships, leave.
One thing
break
that
up with the Kid Fury and Crystal. Break up with him or her. Just leave.
One thing that Leslie Steiner said in her TED Talk, she was talking about this cycle of abuse and why people don't leave, is that what helped her to leave was actually telling a whole bunch of people. And that
because they started looking like,
yeah,
why are you still here?
Well, and they started like saying, like just empathizing with her about like how terrible like the abuse was that she was undergoing.
Yeah.
And then stage 4, actually the last part, and and she said this with a lot of, I mean, for those who are interested, again, her name is Leslie Morgan Steiner. She has a TED Talk. Just Google it, and it's 15 minutes. I think it's really, really enlightening because she is not like someone you would imagine to be in these kind of situations, because whatever you imagine to be like a particular person to undergo this kind of relationship, you're wrong because it happens to everybody. So whatever stereotype you have about this, it's going to fail in some way. And so that stage 4 is basically like kill her. And Raquel, you talked about this like a couple of times, that a lot of people don't leave because they fear the retaliation, right?
Not even just on them.
Yeah. Almost 70% of domestic homicides happen after the victim has left, because then the abuser has nothing to lose. And if it's not someone killing her, then it could be manipulation in family court system where you're regularly forced to interact with the abuser, or if you have children together, the kids have to spend unsupervised time with the abuser. And Dr. Candace Narcott even says, like, because of all these things, because of the financial independence or other ways in which the abuser has made the victim dependent, right? She even cites this stat in the documentary. She says it takes 7 tries for a victim to actually leave their abuser. So all those folks out there are just like, like why don't people leave? Like, you got to understand, like, there is such a gradual manipulation, emotional manipulation that happens to really create an environment that makes it almost impossible to leave at times. And anyone who has gotten out of those situations, who has like left, it just the courage I imagine you had to have, right? I don't know, like I can imagine it just takes so much courage and bravery and tenacity to actually get out of those kind of situations, because they're incredibly painful, incredibly damaging, and it's hard.
Yeah, congratulations to anyone who's able to get out of those relationships. Just like prayers and hope for everyone who is not out of that. But like one of the questions, like, so I feel like one of our themes we need to start having is like questions you can't ask people anymore. So like one, I don't even know if we mentioned this, but like one should be, this isn't even connected to this, but like, when are you having kids? Because like that's a whole thing. Another one should be like, why didn't you leave?
Yeah.
And it should be, instead of saying why didn't you leave, just say why don't I just shut up? Because it's just a dumb question. Like, what were you like? I think we're gonna have a question. We're gonna have every episode a question that
questions that should no longer be asked.
Like, these are questions you are no longer allowed to ask. So one of them is like, why didn't you leave? Yeah. Don't ask that. Yeah. Like, you know how like that's like.
Another one I think is like, why didn't you tell someone?
Yes, because they were scared. Answered. There you go. That's the answer.
Yeah.
They ask them that.
And
they were scared.
People aren't often believed. And which, by the way, so we wanted to get into some stats a little bit. And we won't have time to go through like all of them, but did you want to like highlight a couple, Raquel?
I don't know. Which ones do you... Okay, you pick 3.
All right.
And then we're moving on to like, what's it called? Treatments.
Yeah. And like, what are some things that...
Let's
that
have
we
a
need to
rainbow
do?
here, guys.
Yeah.
Like, so you get 3 and then we're going to something more.
Well, like on the bit of like, I'll do 3. I'm going to do like some of the adult statistics.
Yeah, because there are plenty of harrowing statistics to look at if you want to just
are.
ruin your day.
Yeah. Well, on the bit about like why people don't report, right? So these are statistics from RAIN. This is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. They get their statistics from the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Statistics, right? So a couple things, right? On average, there are about 321,500 victims of rape or sexual assault in the United States. For every 1,000, 995 perpetrators walk free.
That was one. Next one.
And
You only get 2 more.
Okay. And according to the Violence Policy Center, which also uses the Bureau of Justice Statistics, nearly 3 women are murdered every day in the U.S. by a current or former romantic partner. And the last thing I'll share is that African American women are victimized by domestic violence at rates about 35% higher than white women. And those statistics come from the Justice Bureau as well. So what does this mean?
It means it sucks, Justin. No, I don't.
It does. It's terrible.
Like, what does this mean? Let's unpack this further. No, let's keep it where it is. I think those are very good facts
Raquel.
to just stay at.
I know.
It's just depressing.
It's so depressing.
It's so depressing.
I do feel like we do a disservice to not say anything. Like I do just want to say like.
All right, my soul. I'm gonna take
know.
a breath. Okay.
I
think you're being rational, so I'm not going to be crazy in the moment.
I just want to say this is a very obviously a very serious issue, and that there is an impact of race here, right? Like,
yeah.
What this means when you have violent crimes committed against people, like what it means is that on a whole, like society, we have difficulty valuing the lives of people equally across the board. If you're a woman, then obviously that is the case, and if you're a black woman, it's even more the case. And so with that, I think we can all do more to just be aware of how like significant this issue is. And we are going to wrap up with some things that we need to do. So
it's not funny, but this shit's so sad.
it is. What is this, like morose humor? What do like medical professionals have? Where it's like the most worst type of humor.
We have terrible humor.
Yeah.
Like this, like.
Well, you see
a lot of my friends
messed
are
up
medical.
stuff.
You see a lot of messed up
stuff. You hear
stuff.
a lot of fucked up shit all the time, and so.
Even with my patients, one minute they'll be playing a game with me, the next minute they're trying to throw a chair at my head. You gotta laugh to stop and duck, but to stop from it's like, oh yeah, dude tried to knock me out. It's crazy. I love him though. He's cool. We're working progress. It's gonna be cool. It's like even with any session, like imagine how many times you've seen people like. I think it's because you can also see the change that can happen. Like, how many times have you seen sessions where you started with a family or started with a couple and it was so bad?
Yeah.
Like, they cursing each other out, doing all this, like, and it's all this awful stuff. And you still have the faith, and then you get to a point where it's just like progress has been made.
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, let's joke about this now because we're going to fix it. It's not funny, but.
Right. I know the hard thing about our jobs that we always have to do is like, right afterwards, like even on the podcast, like we try to like not take all of it in, but it's hard to like help, you know, you're there to like help people like process and unpack it and sit in it, right? The tragedy of it, to like really and try to make some sort of meaning of it, to understand it, and it's hard work.
Yeah, because when they unpack that, some of that stuff stays in the office when they leave.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it. Like, yeah, we're unpacking all this stuff and you left and some of it is still here. That energy is still here.
Yeah.
That's why clinicians have to be, you know, knowledgeable when they hit a wall and they have fatigue too.
Absolutely.
So like treatments, a lot of treatments work. There's a bunch. Like we can just give some summaries. Like there's like trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's the one I have like the most experience with. And here's one of the things that makes this therapy incredibly difficult, and why like some people may steer away from this type of therapy. Even though it works and it's evidence-based, you do have to talk about your trauma repetitively during this therapy. Like, so we lay the groundwork.
And this is the This is the treatment for children.
Yeah, but TFCBT.
Yeah, it's called something different for adults. I don't know why, but it's the same thing.
Oh.
It's CPT, cognitive processing therapy, or PE, which is prolonged exposure.
And prolonged exposure is an aspect of trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy anyway, because you lay the groundwork, you give them education about what happened to them, you talk to them and teach them some like coping strategies, you try to help them with the way they think, like restructure their thought processes, and then you go through the narrative where you literally have to talk about the trauma multiple times. And the whole point of that is this is something that triggers you, right? It can be a taste, a smell. It could be a something that you see in the apartment. It's going to trigger you. The way I frame it to my patients who, when they're just like, I am definitely not doing this shit, is like, all right, so you watch a scary movie and you jump at this same part. You watch a scary movie, the first time you're going to jump, second time you're going to jump, third time you're going to jump. By the fourth time, you're like, all right, well, now dude going to come out the woodwork and then he going to, like, you get less desensitized to it. Trauma is you're going to have triggers. Thank you. More desensitized to it. So you're going to have more, you're going to have less vigilance towards the triggers.
Yes,
like you do have to walk through that mud to get through it. Like we do have to talk about it multiple times. We do have to talk about not only what happened, what were you thinking, what were you feeling, what were you seeing, what were you smelling, what triggers you, like, because we're just going to keep playing that scary movie until you don't jump at that part anymore. We're checking in with you, we're doing coping strategies, but it's what makes the therapy hard. It makes it difficult because no, we're not going to avoid it, because that makes it like a taboo subject. That's the problem. That's why I have a problem with children having secrets. You don't have secrets, because that just makes it like a breeding ground for so much evil shit to happen, basically. Like, oh, I was told I wasn't allowed to tell you. Why you got a secret at 5? Like, what you hid your Fisher Price somewhere? There are no secrets. So it's just, it works, but it's hard.
Speaking of which, right, like everyone who experiences something traumatic, just about everyone, if you're a human and you can feel, you have some sort of traumatic response initially.
Yes.
That initial traumatic response is called acute stress disorder, right?
So you don't always go to PTSD.
You don't, no. PTSD comes after. And PTSD is more so thought of as like a disruption in the normal healing process to get over something that is traumatic. And that's when it's lasted, don't quote me on this, but it's several months,
6.
I think. 6, I thought so. Okay, great. So it's
DSM.
6 months. So for the first 6 months when you have a traumatic response, it's called acute stress disorder. But then 6 months after that, after 6 months, it becomes PTSD, and it's thought of as like the natural healing basically is stunted. And the reason why that happens, there are like 3 different categories of PTSD, right? Hypervigilance, avoidance. What's the other one?
There's a cognition piece.
Oh, re-experiencing psychological.
Because that's
through
like
nightmares
flashbacks
and intrusive thoughts.
Yep.
Yeah. So avoidance is the one that perpetuates the trauma response.
Yes.
Like, so when you
don't talk about it.
And again, that really, really sucks, because of course you're going to want to avoid it. So this is why like trauma work always includes some sort of exposure, they call it, to the memory of the trauma. So TFCBT does it, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy for children. I mentioned cognitive processing therapy, which is just about recalling the memory. Prolonged exposure therapy is about actually physically going out in the environment and looking at things that remind you of the trauma. So all trauma work generally follows this framework.
It's going to be hard.
You first establish trust and a sense of safety in the therapy room. That takes a long time because you feel so unsafe in light of the trauma. The second part is directly talking about the trauma, as Raquel mentioned, and addressing the avoidance and hypervigilance, addressing how it's impacted your experience of yourself, others in the world. And then last part is actually integration and connection, helping people to become open to trusting again, to exploring again, to trying new things again. And again, that's really, really hard work, but we have seen people go through this type of work. We've seen people do a few weeks. Like I've done a few 12, 16-week protocols in doing like more symptom-focused work at the VA. I've worked with people one-on-one and long-term processing. Psychodynamic therapy has its merits because of the layers of processing that you do in terms of discovering why you feel the way you feel and making meaning of the event that happened. That is so. Even for people who are like religious, right? It changes your way of like understanding the world. So there's a lot of processing that happens, and it takes so much time. And I would encourage anybody who's going through this kind of work to be patient with yourself, to be kind to yourself. Realize that there's going to be moments when you're just not making as much progress as you'd like. Realizing that, sure, this is something that has changed you to a degree, but you can still change. And you can still heal. You can't change the past, but you can impact your present and your future with continued work. And I think the key to that is really just finding a therapist that you feel safe with, that you feel like is trying their hardest to understand you and gets it more times than not. And so it's, again, it's incredibly hard work, but this is the kind of thing that I think really does help people.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, like in order to, if you're thinking about what do you do, if you find out about this, we gave you all the numbers. It's also on our Facebook and Instagram. Try to recognize and be mindful of like the signs of trauma within our community with children and stuff like that. Recognizing predatory behaviors around individuals of like adults who are behaving inappropriately, and not even just adults, because it's unfortunate, but teenagers and other children can be offenders as well. And believe in children when they tell you something is happening.
Absolutely.
Don't just blow them off. Help them get treatment. Hold abusers accountable, because the reasons why this is happening has been able to happen so long is because no one's holding certain people accountable.
Right, with R. Kelly, I mean, it's been decades, right?
Yeah.
Like no one held them accountable.
So take time to listen to the person in question. Don't automatically, provide them with a supportive space. And just hold people accountable, whether that is removing them from the space, removing them from contact with you. Even if we're talking about specifically with celebrities, hold people accountable to let them know that when you do this to children within our community, they will be removed from access to our community.
And the last thing that I'll say is working to break down the toxic socialization of men, right? Like 80+% of women are victims, 80+% of men are the abusers, right? And I would say, like, I am a man. I love being a man. I think there's some awesome things about masculinity, but there are a lot of things that are not awesome, and we know it. And we know that it plays a role in how women are treated in this society, and we have to have larger conversations about that. I think we are. It's been growing more and more and more, and we have to do more of that for not only to protect our other people, like who have ended up on the wrong side of toxic masculinity, and also to make a more healthy community of men. Yeah, very important.
I think that's a really good place to end off on.
I think so. We
Dr.
did good.
Hopkins.
We stayed on task today. We got through everything.
I don't think I did that good with that, but but I appreciate the lies.
We do have to wrap up.
Thank y'all so much for listening. As always, find us anywhere you can find a podcast, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all those good places, Facebook, YouTube. This is going to be amazingly edited. We're so exciting, and you also have video, so there's that part.
This is still nice in here. I mean, these seats are nice.
Everything's very nice.
These mics are good.
Yeah.
We got to come back.
Enjoy it now.
All right. theblackandconscious.com, The Black and Conscious on Instagram.
Yes.
Holla at us. We'll see you in a week.
Thank you, guys.
Peace.